Thanks everyone for coming. This is the Food for People session. My name is Katie Friedman. I'm going to be moderating this session. I'm a COA alum, and I work for Healthy Acadia around community food security issues here in Bar Harbor. And we are going to hear from 3 excellent speakers today. And we're going to have 15 minutes for each speaker. And then we'll have, after everyone speaks, we'll have 30 to 40 minutes, I think, left for question and answer and discussion. So I am going to, without further ado, introduce our first speaker. Dr. Oran Hesterman is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Fair Food Network. And that's a nonprofit that works in partnership with other organizations to design a food system that upholds the fundamental right to healthy, fresh, sustainably grown food, especially in historically excluded communities. And he's also writing a book about his experience with the Good Food movement and how others can join in this important movement. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Hesterman.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon. So after spending many years working pretty much exclusively in philanthropy, and most of those years at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, working on and helping to fund many projects and organizations in sustainable food and agriculture, I'm now leading a new nonprofit organization with the mission that you just heard about, to help design a food system that upholds the fundamental right to healthy, fresh, and sustainably grown food, especially working in what we call historically excluded communities. And you're going to hear about a couple of examples of that in just a minute. It came to me this morning that David Hales and I were thinking kind of alike when I put this talk together and when he was putting his together this morning, that really there's 2 things to think about, you know, with Food for People: what's the issue and what to do about it. And so you're going to hear a little bit about what the issue is from my perspective, and what I see many people doing about it, and what my little nonprofit is starting to do about it. So here's the issue the way I see it. Good food is readily available if you have the money to pay for it. You can go to the farmer's market, you can go to the grocery store. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'll tell you, it is just a oasis of good food in any direction. I have farmers markets, we have multiple CSAs, groceries featuring local food, organic food, any kind of food I want, it's there. But when you don't have a local grocery store, or it's too far to travel without transportation, figuring out how you buy your groceries becomes a big problem. And there are places not too far. In fact, if I just drive about 40 miles east from where I live, and I'm in inner city Detroit, the situation looks much different. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 13.5% of all of our urban U.S. households experience food insecurity at some point in the year. They're not sure where their next meal's coming from. A food desert study that was commissioned and completed by the USDA and just published this past June tells us that 57% of those people living in low-income areas have limited physical access to supermarkets or grocery stores, 57%. We know that of the 166,000 stores in the United States authorized to receive food stamps, or what's now called SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs, the federal program that assists low-income people in buying food, of the 166,000 stores in the U.S. that are authorized to accept those food stamps, 34,000 of them, that's only 20%, meet the USDA's definition of a supermarket or a grocery store. Only 20%. In Detroit, our nation's 11th largest city, of about 900,000 people, 500,000 of those people now live in what has been termed a food desert, where their access to unhealthy food in corner stores, bodegas, and convenience stores or fast food restaurants is much more prevalent than their access to food in one of those places that I can access in Ann Arbor very easily. We know that 1/3 of the city's residents in Detroit right now receive SNAP benefits or food stamps, which is a huge amount. In fact, in doing the calculations, that means there's about $450 million of food economy running through food stamps, or what's now called the electronic benefits transfer card. They're no longer actual stamps. It comes on a card that looks like a credit card. $450 million of a food economy right now in Detroit running through those food stamps, or the bridge card in Michigan, and virtually none of it is being captured right now to support a local food economy or support good nutrition for families. So on the one hand, it's a terrible situation. On the other hand, a huge opportunity. But this is all really just the tip of the iceberg, because I really, as David said, I don't really believe these are problems to be solved. I think it's a symptom of a food system that is broken, a system that's broken and out of control and needs to be redesigned. You've been hearing about it all day. Raj talked about some of the symptoms of a broken system last night. You've been hearing a lot about the environmental symptoms. You know, these symptoms are not only in low-income neighborhoods. Even in affluent neighborhoods, we know that for most of us, food travels about 1,500 miles on average before it gets to our plate, with all the associated environmental costs you've been hearing about all day, and many other environmental issues. But I'm going to focus on some of those issues that are happening in our historically excluded communities because of the lack of access to healthy food. For example, the prevalence of obesity in our kids in the United States between 1980 and 2006 has increased significantly in every age category. In fact, over doubled in most age categories. And currently 32% of all children in the United States are categorized as overweight or obese. This is by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And they tell us, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer to most of us, the lack of access to nutritional food is recognized nationally now as a significant factor in obesity. And then we look at all the diet-related illness because of that. Diabetes is now one of the most common chronic diseases among children in the U.S., and at least one study tells us that 1 out of every 3, if the trends continue the way they've been, 1 out of every 3 children born after the year 2000 in the United States is predicted to develop diabetes. So we know that the need is great. The issue is, what do we do about it? Well, my belief is that step one in asking that question, what to do about it, was to understand the communities that are experiencing these symptoms of the broken food system most severely, are low-income inner-city communities, and see the issue through their eyes. Now, it sounds obvious, but I believe that too often this is a step that's missed by advocates, by activists, and by government leaders, to actually see what the situation is through their eyes. So that's the reason for a study that we conducted and have just recently published, this Healthy Food for All study. I brought a couple of copies with me, but it's also available online on our website at www.fairfoodnetwork.org. You can find a PDF that you can download. But we conducted the study to really see what's the experience of food access and availability like in these communities. The scope of this study, first of all, the goal was to assess the current environment and potential for change, and we looked at 2 communities as examples, Detroit, Michigan, and Oakland, California. And we looked at those 2 because there are some real similarities and there's some real differences. Similarities in terms of the percentage of the families and kids in poverty, similarities in terms of access or lack of access to full-service grocery in some of the communities, but real differences, such as the price to pay for vacant land in Detroit if you want to do urban farming or gardening is very much lower than what you would think about having to pay in Oakland, California. So some real differences, which means different opportunities. The methodology in this study was using setting up focus groups in these communities and doing interviews of some of the advocates or nonprofit leaders in those communities. But focus groups actually randomly chosen folks in different groups. Participants were a range of ages from teens to seniors, range of race and ethnicity in both communities, range of where people lived, and so forth. We asked about their habits, their concerns, and their interests in terms of food access and the food system. We asked about infrastructure and activities to improve access and equity, and asked them about the challenges and opportunities that they feel they are facing. So some of what we learned. We learned that, not surprisingly, residents want to improve their diets through better access to high-quality food so they can prepare more meals, more high-quality meals at home. We learned that they see that there's a lack of outlets with quality, culturally appropriate foods. They have many strategies that they are thinking about to improve access and equity. Some of their major challenges are financing and community environments, and I think it's important to rest on community environments for a moment. What we learned was that challenges like transportation or lack of transportation, neighborhood safety, and racial tension. So the tension between the store owners and those who are shopping in the stores. And we've seen that play out in, at times, violent situations, like in Watts not too many years ago. But it's happening all over. In Detroit, most of the stores that carry food, which are convenience stores, party stores, liquor stores, small bodegas, are owned by Arab Americans and Chaldeans, who are Christian Iraqis. Most of the shoppers, 85% of the shoppers in Detroit, are African American. So the racial tension that's happening there is an interesting one. It's not this, that kind of racial tension. It's not the same racial mix in Oakland, but the same kind of thing is happening. And unless we think about how to address that, the residents told us it's impossible to think about purely looking at food access without looking at an issue like that. Some of the key findings. So we learned that there was, I will tell you from my perspective, more knowledge about diet and food quality than I had expected, and it sort of reinforces the importance of doing a study like this. As a white male of privilege who has lived in a middle-class environment my whole life in the suburbs or in a really nice neighborhood, it's easy to live with an assumption that those folks in the inner city, one of the issues is they just don't know how to eat well. And what I learned from this study is that's my own assumption. That's my own set of assumptions. That's not what we heard from the residents themselves. We heard about concerns of food safety folks had. We heard that cooking is very important. In fact, most of the meals that people are eating, based on our research, are meals that are prepared and cooked at home. And I'll get back to that in a minute. What's lacking is quality food, nearby stores, transportation, and other resources. They need more fresh food in stores. And again, this perception of neighborhood stores about inferior products and preying on vulnerable communities. We also, I think, in this study debunked a couple of myths. One myth you'll notice on your left, which was actually the front page story of the New York Times Magazine maybe about 4 or 5 weeks ago, no one cooks here anymore. Well, that might be true in North Berkeley, and I'm from North Berkeley, I'll admit it. But that ain't true in Detroit and Oakland, that most people cook most of their meals. So we have to be careful not to assume that because we have a certain experience in our community where we live, that's also the experience in another community. And myth number 2, people really don't know how to eat healthy. That's not what we found. We found people have great knowledge about it. The reason this is important is because if you were thinking either as a funder or a nonprofit that, oh, the thing to do is to do nutrition education, food education, or teach people cooking lessons in these communities, well, you might decide you're going to do that, but that's not where I would invest my effort because that's not where it's needed. That's what the communities were telling us. As we understand the issues better from the perspective of the residents of the community, pieces of a food systems redesign, I believe, start to take shape, where we see people working to change the cycle through farmers markets that are showing up all across the country, or community gardens and community-supported agriculture bringing fresh food back into those communities. And even in Detroit, where we looked at a study asking the question, if in Detroit there was a shift in 20% of food purchasing on local products, we would find that annual output could increase, but the one that we're really focusing on now is 4,700 new jobs could be created. So an economic model tells us that you do a shift to more local production of food and you're creating more jobs in the city. And with the focus on jobs and economic development, this becomes very important. This idea of the first economy, the food economy being the first economy. But it's happening all over the country, like in Red Hook, Brooklyn, where Added Value has a 3-acre urban farm where these kids and others are earning money, they're learning how to farm, and they're learning how to conduct business as well. Or Nuestras Raíces in Holyoke, Massachusetts, where multi-generations of largely Puerto Rican families now have created 40-plus businesses all related to local food systems in that city. Or People's Grocery in Oakland, California, where they're doing lots of work on food boxes and on full-service groceries that they're starting to create for West Oakland. Lastly, let me share with you some of the current work of Fair Food Network. One of those special projects we're calling MoBucks for Motown. And the way this project works is anybody who now comes to one of the 5 farmers markets in Detroit with their EBT card and swipes it for to get, that is, you know, like food stamps, to buy fruits and vegetables, actually gets double their buying power. If their card gets debited for $10, they get $20 worth of buying power if they buy Michigan-grown fruits and vegetables. And this is not just for better nutrition for the kids and their families, it's also to support local farmers, because ultimately that's where the money's going to go. I also view it as a laboratory for future public policy. Proven opportunities exist to redesign this food system into one that provides safe, healthy, sustainably, and locally grown food for all of us. The early proving ground has been in some of these small-scale projects, many times in the nonprofit sector, like the ones I've described. I believe the time has come to actually support a transition of these short-term pilot projects into larger-scale market-based solutions. And so an idea that we are now talking about with policymakers both in the state capital in Michigan and in Washington, D.C. is something we're calling a Healthy Food Systems Innovation Initiative. It's a way to support a shift in perspective, in practice, and in policy, a public-private partnership that would support efforts like more marketing venues to bring fresher, locally grown foods into the kind of neighborhoods I've been talking about, training programs to prepare a new generation of local grocers and locally owned stores, African-American owned stores in an African-American owned community like Detroit, incentives for food assistance like MoBucks, mobile markets that feature healthy, locally grown food options driving through neighborhoods where there are no stores, incentives to increase production of fresh fruits and vegetables in urban and peri-urban environments, creating a stronger rural-urban connection, and targeting food procurement dollars to more locally grown and locally processed products. And even creating a new urban food corps of young people dedicated to working on the issue of healthy and sustainable food systems. So what will it take to get there? What will it take to do this kind of work? Well, it's going to take a shift in political priorities. There's no doubt about that. The good news is we now have an administration that understands this as a political priority. We have seen some very strong symbolic statements like the First Lady and the organic garden at the White House, like a farmer's market showing up at the White House. I think it's important that organizations like ours and others make sure that this is more than just a symbolic action that's followed by real change in policy. So is it happening? Yes, these changes are starting to happen. The signs are very positive. It's going to take efforts like what's happening now at College of the Atlantic, the Transatlantic Partnership, the kind of programs that Partridge Foundation, Woodcock Foundation, and others have been supporting and will continue to support. It's going to take all of us working together. The good news is that there are great ideas out there, lots of people working on them, and we now have the political possibility, I believe, to make some real progress. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Hesterman. Next, I'm going to introduce Captain Curt Rice, who's the presiding board director of the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance and was a commercial fisherman for 36 years. During that time, Curt was licensed in lobstering, scalloping, gill netting, sword fishing, trawling, and he retired from commercial fishing in 2007. He served as a research coordinator and captain of FE Robert and Michael during the Maine, New Hampshire Inshore Trawl Survey, 2000 to 2007, and was selected to participate with the Northeast Consortium Collaborative Research Review Panel. Curt's a member of the New England Fisheries Management Council Research Steering Committee, and in 2008, Curt was asked to join Maine Sea Grant Policy Advisory Committee, of which he's an active participant. Thanks, Curt.
Good afternoon. A quick, and I hope not too boring, personal area of experience, a list of activities that have matured me to get me to forums such as this afternoon. I worked for H.P. Hood & Sons right out of college, the United States Department of Agriculture, Stop and Shop, Con Products, Penobscot Poultry, Best Foods, Chef Boyardee, Hillcrest Poultry, and finally, Coastal Enterprises as a consultant. And we know what consultants are, right? That's the day you decide that you want out and you want to be self-employed. And this is what happened to me. As was discussed in a talk earlier today, I kind of took a position of going back to the earth. I went hippie, I got an earring, bling, and I went fishing. Fishing is one of the oldest professions in the evolution of humans. And I thought to myself, what can go wrong? I think everyone here has a vision in your mind of what went wrong in my 36 years as a fisherman. 10 years ago, I was introduced to collaborative research, and in this circle, my intellectual side of my personality was awakened. I had an opportunity to go to school. I joined NAMA. I became a participant in the collaborative of New England colleges. I was asked to sit on the New England Fishery Management Council Research Steering Committee and am a member of the University of Maine Sea Grant Advisory Panel. These groups exposed me to new ways of thinking. I was funded to go to a global meeting in Boston, ICES, the International Conference of the Exploitation of the Seas. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that group. The title sounds like, my gosh, Curt, what did you do? The reality was that they are a conservation-minded global group, which I was just blessed to go to that 3-day conference. The contacts I made, the interaction I made, even, I think it's been 3 years since I went to that conference, people I contact when I need knowledge help at the drop of a finger, no matter where they are on this planet, through wonderful electronics packages we have today, they contact me immediately. It was just a wonderful opportunity. I had a trip to Washington, D.C. to lobby for collaborative research money. And in the summer of 2009, I was asked to go to Mexico as the first fisherman to interact with Via Campesina. Via Campesina is an international movement of peasants, small and medium-sized farmers, the landless, rural women, indigenous people, rural youth, and agricultural workers. The farm workers and peasants of the world, the fight against WTO is a struggle for life. What I learned at Via Campesina conference was just as important to me as my college education. the parallels of injustice globally are the same ones we face locally. Example, the dairy crisis in New England and the US is the same as in the European Union. GMOs, genetically modified organisms. My nephew, a teacher at Putney School in Vermont, is blessed with a wonderful liberal arts education, and he's been to Kenya 4 times in the last 10 years. Blake was telling me of the World Bank and how they talked the Kenya farmers into using GMO seeds to increase their crop yields. What the powers to be did not tell the farmers was that the fertilizers that they must use to make the GMO crops grow would make their soil so hard that when they went to replant the next year, they couldn't till the soils with their traditional methods. It gets worse, but that's another story. When I got to Mexico, lo and behold, what do I learn? The same GMO story rises its ugly head again. The United Family Farmers Coalition that paid for my way to Via Campesina has taught me many lessons. Food sovereignty is a huge issue nationally and globally. On a recent trip across the top of Vermont, I saw 50 miles of GMO corn. What is going to happen to the watershed of the Connecticut Valley if this practice is allowed to continue? There is evidence, although limited, that eating GM corn and being exposed to GM corn, that the nanoparticles may be related to pleural effusion. GMO corn and Bt toxins. I gotta take a time out. I wasn't invited to this conference as an expert on GMO corn and soy. So let it suffice that as a society, we need to be cautious of these products. Fisheries, hopefully my strong suit. Fishermen are predators. As predators, we can think and reason. And using those capabilities, I must ask myself, what percentage of the fish in the biomass can I responsibly remove and be ecologically correct? Sectors are currently being discussed as a management tool. How will sector management help the fish biomass? Within sectors, they're going to inject catch shares. How will catch shares help the fish biomass? In the metrics of these questions I asked, there's a third possibility: spatial management. While spatial management is the least discussed as a potential management tool in our toolbox, it is the most important because it takes into account the ecosystem fish need to prosper. That is, water quality, environmental changes, interaction of fish species in their life cycle, human stewardship, and the subsistence fishing communities that provide food for people. Food that can be sustainable, food that can be toxin-free, and food that is economical to all citizens. That is my vision. These are my ideas of what prompt me to join in forums such as our food sovereignty and community food security. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Rice. Next, I'm going to introduce Bob St. Peter. Bob is the founder of the Independent Food Project and co-founder and I believe current director of Food for Maine's Future. He has helped to promote and preserve rural life around the world through his work with Sustainable Harvest International, the Good Life Center at Forest Farm.
Thanks. Thank you, Katie. I want to start by drawing just a little bit of attention to what I've set up here on the far end of the table. I had the opportunity to travel to Mexico back in early August with Via Campesina as part of the youth camp there. And the youth camp the youth designation for Via Campesina is 35, and so I just made the cut and I got to go. And one of the things that we did before we started our workshops or our sessions each day was we started with a ceremony, a mystica. Basically, it's a way of all of us within Via Campesina. We are from different parts of the world, different cultures. We speak different languages. So it's important that when we come together that we start from places of common ground. And so oftentimes someone will read a poem or somebody will sing a song or present an offering. And so today I brought a few things from my home that are important in my life this time of year. I have an apple, the fruit of our land and of our season, some seeds that I grew, some dried herbs and flowers that we grow and gather and use as medicine, and a small pile of compost. So in the spirit of life and death and rebirth, I make this offering. So I'm currently the director of Food for Maine's Future. Our organization is a statewide food and farm advocacy organization, and we do our best to be a voice for the international food sovereignty movement here in Maine. We are a member of the National Family Farm Coalition, which is a national alliance of family farmers and ranchers, and now fishermen and women with the introduction of the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance. And through that affiliation with the National Family Farm Coalition, we are involved in La Via Campesina, which, as Curt explained, is an international movement of farmers and peasants and landless and rural people who are working to preserve their way of life. What Food for Maine's Future does, and I won't belabor this, but I think one of the more important things we do is we publish a newspaper twice a year called Saving Seeds. I like to think of this as Maine's Food Sovereignty Journal, and I even put it right here because I like to think of it that much. Our next issue is going to be out in a few weeks, so be on the lookout for that. And we try to collect stories from around Maine and from around the nation and around the world that relate to issues of food justice and food sovereignty and sustainable localized agriculture and fishing. We host an annual conference, which we'll do again in March. It'll be our 5th conference. We're looking at Lewiston as a location and the theme of building rural and urban alliances as a theme, because this is becoming of increasing importance as our food system reveals its deficiencies and stress points. We work at a state level to affect policy that help us move us towards our goals, our primary issues, our genetic engineering, national animal identification system, small scale, identity preserved, food processing and production. We help coordinate a buying club on the Blue Hill Peninsula so that we can match up the local producers with the people who want to buy their food and do that in a way that builds community and keeps costs down as much as possible for the buyer, but maximizes the price received by the producer. And on occasion, we are prone to host events, such as the one coming up later this month. Via Campesina has identified October 16th as the first International Day of Opposition to Monsanto. And so here in Maine, we are going to be doing a number of events around the state. There's going to be, I think, 11 showings of the world according to Monsanto, including one here at COA. There'll be a couple seed sovereignty and food sovereignty teach-ins, one at Colby and one at Farmington. And there's some information out there about that. So that's some of the stuff that we do here on the ground to promote food sovereignty in Maine. A big part of what we do is we try to connect the struggles of rural people, of peasants, of family farmers, of the landless around the world with the people here in Maine who are facing those same struggles. Corporate control of our food supply, speculation, unfair pricing and contract growing, landlessness, water rights, private ownership and concentration of the seed supply, fair wages and treatment for migrant labor, violence against women. These are all issues that play out every day around the world, and here in Maine is no exception. And getting these right is going to be of increasing importance in the coming decades. As Russell alluded to earlier, the oil-intensive food production, centralized food production system that is beginning to break down is doing so fairly rapidly. And so the Northeast and New England in particular are becoming increasingly attractive as food-producing regions. We've got ample rainfall, in this case sometimes too much rainfall in this past year. We have a lot of good to excellent soils and land available. So as this model, this behemoth of this industrialized, centralized food system uses up its resources in one place, it's going to look to migrate, and it's going to look to migrate to the Northeast. So what we can be doing now to put some of these things in place are critical, so that we are organized and have an articulated vision for what we want food to look like in Maine and around the region. So is that food system going to look? Is it going to be family farm and fishery based with a focus on local production and local consumption, local production for local needs, or is it going to look more like what we have now, which is kind of a feudal system where few corporations and a relatively few number of people are pulling all the strings, and a lot of us are working for them. So in the coming decades, as we navigate through climatic shifts and resource issues and the geopolitical realities, we still have to answer the question, which is in the program, in the description for this session. And that question is, what will it take for all people to have equitable access to wholesome, sustainably produced food? The short answer to that is food sovereignty. And Raj last night had an excellent definition for that I think applies to food sovereignty, and he said that it's the link between the demand for change, I think he said the demand for change in our food and the demand for political change. And this is the intersection of food sovereignty, and this is largely why Via Campesina is so influential and so important, because it bridges the connections between what we eat and the political realities of where that food came from and how it ended up on our plate. The slightly larger answer to that is that we need to eradicate poverty and violence through building localized food economies. And I'm going to repeat that because I think it's very important. Eradicate poverty and violence through building localized food economies. Last month I was at a meeting of the U.S. Working Group on the Food Crisis. It's been mentioned a couple times here today and last night. And there was about 60 to 70 of us from all around the country doing food systems work. These were people working in inner cities on anti-poverty, anti-hunger work. These were people in rural areas doing emergency food assistance. There were labor people. There were farmers. There were, I don't think Nama was there, but we talked a lot about fishing. So all of us in this room together doing this work, been doing this work, some of them longer than I've been alive. And after about a day of workshops and discussions, we were able to collate what it is we're trying to achieve into this statement, which is eradicate poverty through building localized food economies. And I added violence because Via Campesina places a great deal of emphasis on eliminating violence towards women as a root cause of of injustice, not only in the food system, but in our social and economic and political systems as well. The food crisis group came together a year ago. Okay, I'm going to move on then. So to achieve food sovereignty and to eradicate poverty and violence requires a global and social political movement of people who are acting to affect change in their own communities. This is, fortunately, this already exists in Via Campesina and all of the member groups around the country who are around the world who are doing this work. And what's so powerful is that Via Campesina is able to articulate a clear critique of neoliberal food policies and at the same time articulate a vision of where we're going to go. And I have no qualms in saying that the peasant farmers and the fishers within Via Campesina have the answer to our food crisis. And it's a food crisis that's been hundreds of years in the making since colonization began. But they have the answer because they've been doing it for a very, very long time. I'm going to wrap up here by giving you a few examples of where I think we should look for good models of what is working. A couple here in Maine, one national, one in the U.S., and then one international. Here in Maine, we've got this fabulous group down in Portland called the Winter Cash Project. And this is a group of people who live in Portland, who don't have access to farmland and don't have access to a whole lot of agricultural infrastructure. But what they have is a lot of people who are willing to go out and roll their sleeves up and get dirty. And they've been able to make an arrangement with a woman who owns a farm just outside the city. And they go out during the growing season once a week, sometimes more, and basically grow storage crops. They grow carrots and they grow onions and squash and potatoes. They do this together. There's no money to be made. Nobody's getting, I don't know if they get paid or not. There might be a little foundation money there. But they do this because it's important. And then they harvest the food together and they store it in different places around the city. And then every other week during the wintertime, they bring this food out. And if you help to work, you can come get some. If you need food, you can come get some. So they're feeding themselves and they're feeding their community and they're doing it outside the market economy and they're not asking for anything in return. A man named Will Bonsall, who lives out in western Maine, has been preserving our seed heritage, unbeknownst to a lot of us. And if you don't know Will, I encourage you to look him up online, Category Farm. He operates a project called Scatter Seed. Basically, it's a way of giving seeds out to people. Again, this flies right in the face of the privatization and the patenting of our seed supply. And again, like Winter Cash, Will's doing it, and he's giving away because that's how it's always been done, and that's how it's going to need to be done. Third example was a group that I had the fortune to visit a few years ago out in Los Angeles. At the time, they were called the South Central Farmers, and they had access to 14 acres in south central Los Angeles that was formerly a barren lot full of glass and debris and all the nasty stuff that accumulates in an industrial section of an urban city America. And they cleaned it up, and they built this beautiful farm, and 350 families, mostly Mexican immigrants and migrants, were able to feed themselves and their families and their communities on this 14-acre plot of land. Unfortunately, the developer who owned it didn't think it was as important to have this as, say, another warehouse, and so he evicted them, essentially. And they staved it off for, I think, almost a couple years through locking down the farm and through getting publicity. But basically, they eventually were, the farmers raided the LA County Sheriff's Department, and the LAPD were all there, full riot gear, and they pulled these people out and they knocked their farms down. That's an example of what works, but when it goes up against our traditional thinking about food security and who has rights to things like land, for example, that can be what happens. That's what happens when that's not preserved in the face of power and money. So, the fourth final example I want to give is the landless peasants of Brazil, who have been taking matters into their own hands. People who are living in urban areas who have access to no money, no food, no prospects. But what they have is a willingness to work, and they have a knowledge base that would allow them to be able to feed themselves. And so people in Brazil have been organizing, and what they've been doing is they've been going out to into the rural countryside where land is owned by speculators, and they squat, and they build farms, and they build communities, and when necessary, they resist eviction. One of the events that Via Campesina celebrates annually or one of the dates is April 17th, which is the anniversary of a massacre of a group of landless people who had been trying to feed themselves and their families and their communities. The landowner called in some thugs, and 17 of them were murdered. So the question I guess I kind of want to leave here, and it's a bit provocative, but what do we do when our attempts to change policies and when those attempts fail, when we're beaten back by the police and the military, when we try to hold transnational corporations and international financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank and international trade organizations like the WTO, when we go to the meetings and we say we don't want this, but they continue to have their meetings and they continue to force their way of doing things on us, when we try to hold them accountable and the state and all, all the military apparatus says nope, what are we going to do? Are we here in Maine ready to support land occupation, for example? I mean, when all the other traditional things break down and there are hungry people and there's land that's sitting idle and people go and take it, are there going to be kind of the understanding, the solidarity that we're going to need to support them? For the billion hungry people around the world and the more than half the population, the women who are providing 60% of the food, who are caring for families, who are holding communities together, for all those people, food sovereignty is a matter of life and death. And it's also the best way, and I might venture to say the only way, that those billion people are going to be able to feed their hunger. And it's the only way that the rest of us are going to be able to feed our hunger for a food system that's based on justice and dignity for all. And I'll leave you with a Via Campesina slogan, which I hope you'll take to heart: globalize the struggle, globalize hope. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. We have about a half an hour now left for question and discussion, so I'm just going to open it up to the audience for questions.
Could one of you talk about, whichever one feels most knowledgeable, could one of you talk about the BT corn in Maine? I heard something about that, and then I left the country, and I don't know where that was resolved.
Bob, do you want to take that question?
Sure, I'll take that one. In 2008, Maine became the last state to allow the growing of BT field corn in the state, and this past year became the last state to allow the growing of BT sweet corn in the state. I don't know what else to say in there. I can add there are some stipulations that the Board of Pesticide Control has set forth, and there are some barriers that have been put in place to help prevent contamination, cross-pollination, and the like. 300 to 500 feet. Also probably knows better than I, but those are the distances that the Board of Pesticide Control is saying, okay, woefully insufficient to prevent cross-contamination. And no, I would imagine it was grown this year and was probably on the farm stands around the state.
I'd just like to add, and I think I'm right, if I'm not mistaken, the pesticide board ignored 18,000 public comments against allowing BT corn. And one positive thing did happen. In the state of Maine, Monsanto does not have to list their customers, but at least they have to list where they've sold it, in other words, where it's being planted. So it's perhaps the beginning of accountability, but the very upsetting thing is just in the face of all that public comment, allowing it to happen in the first place.
Can you just go back and elaborate on what BT corn is?
Sure. BT is a bacteria that is inserted into corn gene, or cotton gene, and it's essentially a pesticide. And so when insects eat the corn, they ingest the bacteria, which is toxic, and they die. So it's a built-in pesticide. Bacillus thuringiensis is the, if you want to look it up. BT corn should get you all the information you need.
And the ramifications for organic growers who use BT in a different fashion that will become useful for them anymore, correct? Can you repeat the question, please?
The question was, what are the ramifications for organic farmers who use BT in an organic fashion? It's a pesticide that's certified organic and is safe to use for organic farmers. And the question is, what are the ramifications when it's introduced as a genetically modified organism?
Well, the primary ramification is insect resistance, and so it becomes less effective as a pesticide for the organic crops if there are pests who are eating it, not dying and reproducing. And there are also economic benefits, or excuse me, potential economic consequences if you're growing non-GMO corn or organic corn and your corn is found to be contaminated. There is a growing interest in testing organic crops for integrity, for non-GMO contamination, and it's both worrisome. It's good on the one hand because having the right to know is important, but on the other hand, it's a little worrisome because there's a good chance that there's a lot of organic food out there that's likely to be contaminated. So, and up until 2 years ago, as far as BT is concerned, Maine was a safe haven of sorts, which is gone.
Question for Oren. You mentioned in the Healthy Food for All report that was done that it showed some divides, I guess, in policies, strategies that were being promoted between the residents and advocates. And I'm interested in that. Did the study include focus groups or interviews with advocates as well as with residents? And what kinds of divides were you finding?
So what we did with the study, the focus groups were exclusively with residents, but we did interviews with, I'm not sure advocates is the right word, but that's the word we use in the report. And at times we did find some differences. One of them specifically that I can recall is this thing about access to transportation. So it was the access to transportation to be able to get to a grocery store or somewhere to buy healthy food was always in every focus group right there. Very few of the interviews of advocates, in very few of the interviews did that ever show up as a major issue. So that was one of the places where the folks who are claiming to represent the interests of residents were kind of missing a piece that the residents themselves said is important to them. And then in the report there are a few others, but that's one that comes to mind.
In the back?
This is also directed at Oren. I have just a question about some of the political barriers and actually that's it really, the political barriers that are in the way of engaging local communities to really provide resources and grow their own resources.
So are you, help me understand if you're thinking of political barriers at the local level or at the federal level?
Actually, I was throwing it out as a more general question to try to understand more about the barriers that are in the way to creating those community engaged garden, food resources, in thinking about how to become a more effective advocate or supporter?
So you can see barriers at many levels, but I just think about, for example, in a place like Detroit, where about a third of the land area is now vacant, over 100,000 lots that no longer have homes on them that could be used for community gardens or aggregated for larger urban farming. But there are no good local policies that allow for the transfer of that land. Even if it's land owned by the city, it's very difficult to get access to the land. And this is where sort of the stories of Landless in other countries and low-income folks in a place like Detroit come together. You could go and squat on land like that and start to grow food, but if you're going to do it well, we all know it takes years of dedicated work to build soil to a point where it's producing well for you, and you don't want to do that if you don't have some kind of assurance that you can stay there for a period of time.
Did you build, or are people building partnerships or alliances with local kind of real estate, I don't know, either developers or dealers or land holders? I live in Manhattan, so I'm thinking about the ways in which that could benefit bringing whole, the way it does bring up whole communities.
Yeah, it's starting. So there's, for example, a development I know of in Detroit where they're actually in the planning stages. They're including a urban garden as part of a development. So they hope that that's actually going to attract people to this particular area if it's an area where they can have gardens or small-scale farms, whether they're doing it themselves or having access to it. So people are starting to think about it. To me, one of the more hopeful signs are these food policy councils that are starting to emerge all over the country. And both Oakland and Detroit now have local food policy councils that are chartered by the local government. If they're not chartered by the local government, at least they have a serious ear of local government. And so there's a good interaction there where local units of government, either city or states now, are having the opportunity to hear from residents and advocates about these issues in a more organized way.
Can I follow up to that? One of the domestic barriers that sometimes gets put off into the international realm is that of subsidies and of dumping. So the food that's subsidized, the commodity that's subsidized in this country and then processed by Cargill or ADM or Kellogg's or whoever and turned into the fast food and the junk food that's prevalent in these food deserts that Oren was talking about, that undercuts local producers in this country just like it does in Mexico and other parts of the world. So I think one of the political barriers is undoing that subsidy system so that producers are competing on a fair playing field.
That Food Policy Council issue is a really interesting one because in Maine we have one. It's been chartered by the Maine legislature, and it also includes a number of state agencies as members, and they really don't want to participate. So you have a state food policy council. We have actually a very visionary goal of maintaining capacity to produce 80% of our food, but all the momentum has to come from the citizen public members because the institutional members are overcommitted, don't have any resources, don't really want to be involved in that. And I guess that leads to the question I was going to ask before that topic came up, and it's about Raj Patel's talk last night, talking about how essentially we need somewhere between 2 and 7 Earths to feed us with the current food system. So where's and I would have asked Hardy if we had a longer chance, but where's the opportunity or the momentum, or where do we start that conversation in a way that is not saying, oh, you're using too much, you're poor, we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to ratchet everybody else down in the food cycle here. So, if we'd done this conference a year ago during the run-up in oil prices, we would have talked a lot more about the energy intensity of agriculture. But it doesn't matter really which way you come to it. We've got to address that tension, and I'd like to hear from each of you really what are the next steps? Because we can't get there all in one step. What are the 2 or 3 next steps that are most critical?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Russell. I'm a big believer in communities. Communities given the resources will find the solutions that communities will find to the issues that face them are going to be the solutions that last. So rather than say, here are the steps that need to be taken, what I believe is a big step that needs to be taken is to provide communities with those resources to unleash the creativity and innovation that's there right now. I mean, yeah, on the large scale, we need 7 more Earths, perhaps. At the same time, there's 6,000 acres of vacant land within the city limits of Detroit with a high water table, good soil, and hungry people. And we don't have to go to another planet to figure out that there is a resource there that could be used. But the combination of a lack of incentive and a lack of imagination sort of have kept that from happening. It's starting to emerge now, and my belief is that there have been sparks of this kind of work going on all over the country. You and I both know this because we've been involved in this for a long time, for 30 years. There is a unique moment right now that we should understand and not lose track of, and the unique moment is both that there is a public understanding and consciousness building around these issues that's never been here before, ever. I mean, I've been working on this for 40 years. There's never been a moment where there's more public understanding and awareness about these issues. At the same time, we now have a federal administration. We have a White House that also understands this issue as no administration has in the past. And we have a philanthropic community that is starting to support these issues in a way that's never happened in the past. Well, that to me is a combination that we need to pay attention to, and it's not about sitting here and designing the way forward and the specific steps, but it is about trying to coalesce the awareness, the support, and the resources at the same time, and try to provide the hopeful signs and the monetary resources that could be used at these communities for them to create the solutions that are at hand right now.
My vision may be a little bit too much of a dream, but I do believe that in the next 10 years, we will not be able to afford to bring strawberries from California to Maine. I love strawberries, 12 months of the year. Can it be done? I also believe that we are looking at the end of consumerism in America as it has been practiced the last 50 years. If I'm right on that, where are my grandchildren going to work? What are they going to do if they're not building me a widget? Could they farm? Could their life be fulfilled in a relaxed, meaningful environment of feeding the people? Is there anything wrong with a subsistence way of living? Could I take a windmill and make electricity so that I could turn on a light because in another couple of weeks there won't be enough daylight for my plants to grow in my greenhouse? Can I put in a solar panel to heat hot water that I could keep buried in the ground so that I could affordably heat my greenhouse so I could grow 12 months of the year? I think it's conferences like this that plant those seeds of thought that let us plan and reach out long term.
There are a lot of next steps, but the one that I'll highlight is land reform, and I think as a starting point, obviously we need to be able to feed ourselves and be able to feed our communities, and in order for that to happen, we need more producers, and we need more people who are able to work the land, and in the community where I live, I'll never be able to afford a farm. I live in Blue Hill Peninsula. I would love to farm, but I can't afford to farm. And I would be more than happy to produce food for my community and provide that security, but the economics don't make any sense. So there are some programs and organizations in the state that are looking at land issues and land access issues, but they're operating within a market economy that doesn't make sense in terms of those of us who are poor to be able to access that land and to make use of it. So I think the next step is generosity, is that people who have land making it available. And that doesn't mean, saying, I've got a back pasture, why don't you go ahead and use it for a while and graze your cows or grow your vegetables, and then leave the producer with no security, with no equity, and with no tenure of any kind. I'm talking about significant land reform where if you've got 400 acres, you're gonna chop it off, give your kids what they need to have a decent livelihood, and then make the rest of that land available to people who are gonna use it to produce food for themselves and for their community.
In the back?
Yeah, relating to land reform, I was just wondering where sort of the ideas of land reform come up against conservation. So in the example of the MST in Brazil, that there's people who are concerned about conservation in the Amazon, see that as one influence where, developing undeveloped rainforest is, something that contributes to it's a big factor of deforestation. And, if we talk, in doing that in Maine, that it could be a similar thing where if there's people who have a lot of land, if a lot of it is undeveloped, that, is just making it available. So it's sort of like, how do these two things come up against each other? How can they be balanced, the idea of doing land reform, but also supporting conservation at the same time?
I'll just talk about what goes on in my community to kind of answer this and leave the rainforest for another time. There are a lot of pastures on the Blue Hill Peninsula that are cut every year, just mowed down or cut for hay. Nothing's ever put back on them. So there's already, I can't even tell you how many acres, hundreds of acres that aren't forested, that are in pasture, that are being depleted year after year after year, and a restorative farming program would do more to promote conservation than leaving it vacant as a vista. So utilizing existing lands is key to land reform. It's frustrating for those people I've known who've wanted to farm, who have gone into farming and had to buy a wooded lot and had to cut it down in order to be able to farm. That doesn't make any sense. There's plenty of open land that can be managed in a conservation, in a conservative way.
What about, I took a class here once, and I hear what you're saying, Bob, about land reform, and I believe too that's like the most important issue of people want to grow food. We need to obtain land. I came to the conclusion of what about if there was some sort of government land, or some sort of like the Blue Hill Heritage Trust or something like that, set aside land that it was designated to people to grow food forever. Like maybe we could, lobby and get together. Maybe some of these people, or I'm not active, politically, but we could, you know, maybe suggest to certain, you know, policymakers and lawmakers saying that we could have, I don't know, whatever, just different tracts of land of however many acres, and that's it. People are going to live on that land and grow food, or homestead, and you know, I just see that as another alternative to land reform.
We go to the legislature next session and try to bring it up if you want.
But it's that type of creative thinking that has potential, and hang on to it. You're a young man. It may take 30 years to happen, but it would be worth it.
Yeah, and there are all these, you know, all these avenues are open for exploration, and Maine has a farmland conservation program, and like I said, there are other organizations doing these things. I think it may turn out that these aren't sufficient to meet the needs of the people in Maine who want access to land, but also the people in Maine who want to be able to eat most of their food from within the state.
In the middle?
Yeah, the 5,000 acres in the middle of a large city is what catches my imagination. And it's true for Blue Hill as well. What's wrong with having the town government or the city's government say dedicate X number of acres for agriculture and allow maybe 100 square foot or 200 square foot space for whoever wishes to sign up? People will come along and build the land and use it. It's not enough so somebody's got a homestead there, but it would be a mechanism to provide good wholesome food for a large number of people for a very low cost.
So, so two specific examples. You saw the picture of the value-added farm in Red Hook, Brooklyn. That's a 3-acre, used to be a playground, and the City of New York Parks Department gave access to that land to this nonprofit organization. They literally built their farm on top of the asphalt. Literally, they did not even dig up the asphalt. They created like 16-inch deep beds of composted soil, and it's a beautiful organic farm sitting on top of asphalt in the middle of New York City. The second example is just a few weeks ago, the city of Detroit actually deeded 3.5 acres of land to a nonprofit organization called the Greening of Detroit to create a 3.5 acre market garden in inner city Detroit. So what you're talking, I mean, you know, 3.5 acres is, it's a long ways from there to 5,000, but it's a start. So there's a start happening. You know, Russell, back to your question, next steps. I think the most important next step is for conscious consumers to become engaged citizens. If you want to know, you know, my sort of core belief on this, you know, the fastest growing segment of the food industry is organic sales, and the USDA is predicting that by 2013 there'll be a 78% increase in demand for locally grown food. So we know there is a huge building demand. People are changing their individual behaviors. And I think the most important step is those of us who are changing our individual behaviors to realize that that's part of the equation, and part of the equation is to become engaged citizens. And wherever we are, whether it's with our schools, with our local procurement, with impacting state policy, national policy, we have to get engaged in this issue as citizens, not just as consumers.
I think we're going to leave it at that unless there's any more pressing questions, but we're just about at time. One more question in the back?
I'm just curious, when the city deeds some land to a nonprofit, then does the liability risk then go to the nonprofit? Because I've worked with at least 2 or 3 communities on trying to get gardens going, and they're all saying, well, we won't give you town land because we don't want to accept the liability risk. And we have one that works in Oren because it's a university project, and we have university sort of liability protection, if you will. So we were able to get it to go. But that seems to be one of the real hang-ups to getting this thing moving forward, and I haven't really had a real good answer to how
Well,
do we do
I mean, the
that.
nonprofits that take this on have to carry liability insurance for their own benefit. So, but liability insurance for a small market garden is not a huge expense. But it is an expense that they have to consider. Absolutely.
Okay, well, we're going to thank our presenters one last time, and thanks everyone for coming.